Okay, coronavirus, Jerusalem Diary, day 6. Part of the thing about making videos during this time is that we expect to be interrupted. So if you hear things in the background, that's just because my house is just like your house. I wanted to talk about being an English professor. I wanted to talk about language today and its use and misuse. I have been really for the past month sharing with people my thoughts about the evolution of the coronavirus and what I thought would happen. And much of what I anticipated to happen actually has happened. And at first, my insights were met with "you're overreacting, you're hysterical," and then by the time what I had anticipated came to pass, that it was me who was calm and the people who had been in denial all along who were overreacting. I guess I'm constantly surprised. I thought, I'll give one talk about people being in denial, but it seems that's basically the theme for everybody everywhere. The new way of denial is, and I'm saying this, and it's not a pleasant thing to say, and hopefully I'm wrong, and I've said this each time, hopefully I'm wrong. I said a lot of people are going to get sick, and people say to me, chas v'sholom, which means in Hebrew, God forbid, as if somehow the very invocation of this, the power of my language, is going to cause this. Now, the rabbinic tradition, the Jewish tradition, does believe in the power of language, and even in the power of language to create reality. That's very, very much part of the rabbinic tradition, that through language we do create reality. That's where we're so careful with speech and so careful with making vows, because the idea is if you say you're going to do something, you've already performed in some sense, or you've made a promise to fulfill that action, and that promise has a certain kind of reality. So my chas v'shalom is met with, or my predictions about what might happen, or my anticipation of what might happen, is met with this chas v'shalom, which is just another form of denial. It's somehow like people are saying, because of you, these things are going to happen. Now, of course, we also know that language in the rabbinic tradition, in the Jewish tradition, has a power of safeguarding or warning. See the Bible, see the prophets, see Jeremiah. Am I equating myself with Jeremiah? Certainly not. But there is a certain sense in which we can actually try to educate people and to tell and warn them about future things. I mean, part of that is really accepting upon ourselves the mission that our insights give to us, that if we are in the position of understanding, then we have to find a way of trying to let other people understand what we understand. And of course, that's not easy all the time, because we get involved in social or personal dynamics in which we're over-invested, such that we become much more interested. And I think this is a natural thing. It's really not a critique. It's a human tendency. We have a natural tendency to want ourselves to be heard. I want to be heard, and of course that's true. I do want to be heard. I want to be heard by all the people in my family. I want to be heard by all the people in my neighborhood who have more or less given up on. And maybe that's a fault of mine, and maybe I should try to adjust what I have to say to those people in such a way that they can hear. Now, since it is Erev Shabbos, I did want to talk a little bit about that whole idea of accommodating what you know to the language that you speak. And this parsha, like two parshiot beforehand, speaks about the building of the Mishkan. And the rabbis of the Talmud, or those who write the Midrash, look at Betzalel, who is attributed with building the temple, or the tabernacle. The rabbis use this as an opportunity to think about the way in which the divine can be accommodated into the human world. How can the divine come into the human world? Meaning, the sages look at this verse, or these sets of verses, when Betzalel builds the tabernacle, as an opportunity to think about, well, how do I take the divine, and how do I bring it, or how do I infuse the physical world with it? in some sense, the one of the midrashim says, Solomon asks, and he's building the temple, how can I fit the divine presence into the temple? Of course, this temple was this large, glorious thing in Jerusalem, and the tabernacle built in the desert was smaller, so all the more so. So the rabbis bring in a verse, and the verse is Yoshev Beseter Elyon, that God, and the rabbis learn this counterintuitively. It seems like the verse is saying man will dwell, or man will be in the shelter of God. But the rabbis learn it, understand it as he who sits in a hidden place is most high over all his creatures. Now the name that's used for God here is Shaddai, which means sufficiency or enough. It's actually the name of God that's used when we think of God in his limitation. Or God as limiting, God as saying enough. The rabbis in another place say the creation would have gone on and on and on and on and on had God not acted in his attribute of sufficiency and said enough. The creation has limits. So it's not. It makes sense that the rabbis would use this verse as a way of understanding Betzalel building the tabernacle or the Mishkan. That is, God has to be limited in order to come down into the physical world. So the rabbis continue and say, the way we learn this is Batzel Sha'asa Betzalel. That is, we understand this verse, and here the rabbis are understanding the verse poetically, in the shelter that Betzalel made. Betzel, which means the shadow, and the translation here is probably accurate, in the shelter that Betzalel made. So somehow the divine is brought down into the shelter that Betzalel, and he is the primary example in the Bible, in the 5 books of Moses, of the artisan, the person who makes things. How does the person who makes things bring the divine into the world? Or rather, the person who makes things does bring the divine into the world. Betzalel is a figure of creativity. Betzel Shaddai. That is, through his activities, he actually provides a shelter of God, a shelter for God. I would even say differently, maybe a shadow of God, or even, and now I acknowledge that I'm reading a little bit platonically here, an image of God. And through the image, and now we're back to language, and through the image, through the tabernacle, through creativity, through language, we can actually bring the divine into the world. It's the power of language. The power of language can be used to obfuscate, to obscure, to not let people see. But the power of language can also be to educate. Here, the sages are talking about divine accommodation. What I mean by that is, how do I take the divine and bring it into the world? I study Milton's Paradise Lost. That's the main issue that he's interested in. How do I represent the divine? Milton feels a mission. He feels a mission. Otherwise, he would be silent, because he's afraid actually that he'll misrepresent the divine through the images that he gives. But he overcomes that fear because he feels the mission that what he has to say is of such great significance. So we should understand, following the model of Betzalel, the powers of human creativity, the way in which we can take the divine and infuse it through creation in our daily activities. That might mean also turning to the people we know, we love, whom we live around, and trying to express the things that we want to say. We all have our missions, especially in this time. So use language with really the awe that is entailed by language, knowing its powers. Shabbat Shalom.